specialist based out of Ontario, near Guelph. And I also have Eric Ness with me here today, and he is in Eastern Ontario. So we're going to be here to walk you through some things that you might want to consider for pre-harvest, as well as answer any questions that you might have. We are going to record this webinar, just so that you know. And I just wanted to share a slide that if you do have any questions, down on the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat bubble. If you click on that, you'll be able to type in your questions and we'll try to answer them on the go, but we'll also come back to them at the end. And of course, if you can't hear, just make sure that you turn your audio device on. You can either call in or use the audio from your computer. And then just for a quick agenda, we're going to cover off, if you do not have a yield monitor, what your options are. And then we'll do some nitty-gritty on just covering iPad compatibility, as well as just making sure that your apps are updated and ready to go for harvest. And then we'll actually jump in and talk about all the things we need to think about before we start harvesting. Again, we'll do questions at the end, but I think we will. So the first thing we wanted to cover is, if you don't have a yield monitor, can you still participate in harvest in some way? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. There's a number of different ways that you can get your data into FieldView, even if you're not able to use the FieldView drive while you're traveling through the field and actually collecting your data. So one of those first options is just creating a manual yield map. We're not going to go through how to do that today. We will be sending out a follow-up email following the webinar with instructions and videos on how to do that. But basically, you're able to enter in the information that comes back from the elevator, and it will generate a yield map for you based on the variability that's in your field. We also have the option of using data inbox. So if your equipment is not compatible to map with the drive live in the field, but you do have a yield monitor, we likely are able to bring that information in online after you've harvested, and you will still see the same data layers in your account. And then lastly, if you don't have a combine that's currently mapping, there are some options such as FarmTRX or the Loop Electronics Yield Monitor that are kind of a low-cost option for being able to begin mapping. If you have any questions on those, we're happy to follow up. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about those today, but just wanted to let you know that if you're not able to use the drive, please do stick around this. There is still a lot of valuable information in here if you're able to use one of those other three options. So we've already talked about that one. The next thing we're going to talk about is making sure that your iPad is going to be good to go for this season. So typically Apple stops supporting different iPad models after roughly 5 years. So if you have an older iPad, you might want to consider going to the climatefieldview.ca website, clicking on support, and then typing in add iPad device to come up with the list that you see on the right-hand side. I realize it's quite small for today, so you might not be able to see it very well. But basically this list will just tell you, is your iPad going to function well this fall, or do you need to consider updating to a newer device? Basically what happens after 5 years, Apple stops enabling that iPad to update to the newest iOS platforms, and the newest iOS platforms are required to the newest versions of the CAB app and the full FieldView app. So if your iPad is 4-ish years or newer, you're more than likely good to go. But if you have an older iPad, maybe just consider going to the climatefieldview.ca website and just checking this list to see if your iPad will work. To figure out what iPad you have, you can just take off your case and look at the back. There'll be a very small number towards the bottom of your iPad. So you can check there to what version you have. The next thing we want to talk about is just making sure that your apps are up to date, and in particular, the FieldView CAB app. So the most up-to-date version right now is 9.1.2. And for the full FieldView app, it's 6.12. So just make sure that you are running those for the best experience. It will have any of the most up-to-date bug fixes that we have identified, as well as any of the newest features that have come live. In terms of your Apple updates, iOS 13.6 is the newest update. We ask that you do update now. and get onto that version so that you can run the newest CAB app version. But with that being said, after you have updated to 13.6, we are recommending that you shut off your automatic updates. Apple is planning to release iOS 14 in, I believe, September, but it is this fall. And while we are able to test the CAB app on iOS 14 before it releases, we're not guaranteed to test the final version that Apple will release. And because of that, we can't be absolutely positive that there won't be any bugs or crashes or anything like that. So just to be safe, we recommend, because that is going to come partway into harvest, that you just shut off your automatic updates, continue running on 13.6 with the newest update of CAB app. And once we've been able to test it, once it has gone live, we will send out a recommendation for that. But for now, we do recommend just turning it off just in case. And I will show you once we jump into the iPad where exactly you can go to do that. So I'm going to switch over to my iPad here quickly so that we can start going through that. And I hope you can see my iPad screen now. Can I just get a yay or nay from Eric or Janine?
Yes, I can see it.
We're good to see. Okay, perfect. So the first thing I'm actually going to cover is just where you're going to check for those updates. So I'm going to click on my settings icon at the bottom of my screen. And then under General on the left-hand side, the second one down is Software Update. If you just click on that, it will tell me my iPad is updated to 13.6.1. And then if I click Customize Automatic Updates, I currently have Download iOS Updates automatically turned off. So that's where you're going to want to toggle off so that it does not automatically update to 14 on you. And then in terms of figuring out where or whether your apps are up to date, I just recommend simply going to the App Store and typing in Climate FieldView and seeing whether it says update beside the app or not. So you can see that my CAB app and my full app both say open, which means that they are up to date. If it said updated, just tap on that and it will update the apps for you. So that's all I wanted to talk about in terms of getting your iPad up and ready. The next thing I want to do is to go into the actual CAB app. And there's a couple things that we want to check just to make sure that we're ready for fall. So the first one that sometimes gets forgotten, and it can change when we update apps, is the units that we are using. So if you click on settings, most of us, I would say, are probably still using inches and feet rather than centimeters and meters and that sort of thing, as well as bushels per acre. So if you want to see your units in inches and bushels and that sort of thing, you're going to want this top units toggled on to English. Otherwise, you're going to start seeing things in centimeters, and I know it's just not always the easiest way to do things. So just make sure that that's toggled over to English. And the other one that I want to make sure is toggled on is Cloudsync. I don't have a great internet connection, so I'm not going to turn that on right now. But when you're in the field, if you have a data plan, you're going to want to make sure that that one's turned on so that your data is constantly being sent to the cloud and not just living here on your iPad. Because in case the iPad gets dropped as you're coming out of the combine or it somehow gets wet or whatever, we don't want to lose that data. So if you have Cloudsync enabled, it'll make sure that that data is going up to the cloud. So those are the two things that I wanted to cover under General. The next thing I want to go down to is just the Data tab. And I just want to show you the bar at the very bottom of the screen. Mine says available 119.67 gigabytes. That says that there's a lot of data left, or a lot of space available left on my iPad to collect data this fall. If you're getting towards the right-hand side and your iPad's getting quite full, you might want to consider going and deleting any unnecessary apps, or perhaps sending your photos to the cloud and maybe deleting some of those so that you do have space so that you don't run out while you're in the field. So just know that that bar is there to help you understand how much space you do have for this fall. The next I want to go through is setting up your equipment. That's kind of the next important that we need to cover off. And I'm not going to go through how to actually set up a brand new combine, but rather all the things that we need to go through once that combine is set up. And the reason I'm not going to cover it is it's very simple. You just click add new equipment at the bottom, and it's a wizard that takes you through entering your combine make and model. So I'm just going to click on the one that I already have set up here, the second one down. I'm just going to click the word setup, and it's going to bring me into the screen that I would come to if I added a new piece of equipment. And so on the left-hand side, there's a list of options here to make sure are all in place and are accurate. And the reason we want to do that is everything in here can affect our acre count or the way that we are calculating yield. So we want to make sure that these are all accurate so that our maps are as clean and as accurate as possible. So this very first one we're on is our GPS offsets. And this is just telling us where the GPS is living on your combine. So offset A at the bottom of my screen is just asking me how far forward of the center front wheel axle is the GPS. And you can see on the image directly above, the GPS is represented by that little blue dot. And so this defaulted to 77 inches forward of the wheel axle. But if it was, let's say, towards the back of the combine, I could select offset back and just enter how many inches it is, again, from the center front wheel axle back to where that GPS is. But I'm just going to leave it where it was offset to the front. The next most important one would be offset B, and that is how centered it is on the piece of equipment. I have yet to run into anybody here in Ontario that doesn't have their GPS centered, but if for some reason it was over the stairwell or something like that, I could select offset left, which is in the upper right-hand corner of my screen, and say, okay, it's, I don't know, 2 over to the left of my combine. But as I said, in most cases, this is always 0. And then C is how high the bottom of the receiver is off the ground. The reason that one is important is for having accurate elevation maps. So again, this one defaulted to 144 centimeters. But if you want to make sure it's as accurate as possible, just grab your tape measure and do a quick measurement to make sure that that is accurate. So that's all we need for figuring out where the GPS is on the piece of equipment. The next item we want to cover is heads. And I would argue that these are probably the most important piece to have set up correctly. Again, if you need to add a new head, if you've purchased one this year that you haven't used before, just select add new head at the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, you can just select edit on one of the ones that you've already set up. You can see that the one that I selected is an 8-row corn head. If you need to change anything, you just click the drop downs. It's fairly simple. At the bottom, we're going to skip where it says current height and max harvesting height. I'm going to do that when we actually connect to a drive. And the reason being is you can't set that unless you're sitting in the piece of equipment. And there really isn't a rule of thumb that I can give you to type in. It really comes back to the individual operator's preference in how high or low they lift their head as they're exiting a row. And so that's going to really come into play with accurate acre count as you pull out of a row. It basically tells the FieldView platform when to stop calculating yield. So again, we'll cover that one when we get into the in-field demo, but just know that you can also set that in here. The bottom is where we want to make sure you have this accurate. So these measurements are just to help us understand where the grain is being cut. So A is how far forward is the cutting bar from the center front wheel axle. This is defaulted to 188 inches, sorry. B is your row spacing. And then C is your head offset. Again, in Ontario, I have yet to run into somebody with an offset head, but if it is offset, you would just enter that here. So that's all we're going to talk about for head setup. Oh, actually, that's a lie. The only other one I want to talk about is a platform head. When you set up a platform head for, say, soybeans, you're going to have this option that says swath sections. And it can be a bit confusing, but basically what swath sections is a way of dividing up that platform head. So if you have a 40-foot head, we typically recommend just maxing it out to 32. And what it's going to do is it's going to divide that 40 feet into 32 individual sections. So as you come to an end of a row, it's going to start shutting off in 1 and a bit foot sections as you start running out, as you come into, say, a triangular piece. There's really no rule to this. If you have a 30-foot head, a lot of people will just have 30 sections. If you have a 40-foot head, some people might prefer having 20 sections so that they're 2 feet. Excuse me. But whatever you do, just know that that's what it's going to divide your head into. So I think that's all I'm going to cover for head. The next one down is settings. So this is where, if you're running multiple combines, you're going to want to make sure that your shade cloth is turned on so that it can accurately calculate excuse me, acres as you're traveling through the field with different combines. Automatic swath sensitivity is, again, how sensitive it's going to react to rows shutting off. Typically, the recommendation is to only make it more sensitive if you have RTK. Otherwise, we do recommend just leaving it down here at less sensitive. And then the last one on this page is your flow sensor lag. And so that's the amount of time it takes from the grain to hit the cutting bar, excuse me, until it hits the pedal. And so typically an easy way to measure this is as you begin pulling into a pass, just take a stopwatch and start the timer as soon as your grain hits the cutter bar. And then as soon as it starts coming into the tank, stop your timer and then take off about 1 or 2 seconds. Basically, you'll have an issue with your flow sensor if you're entering a field, if it has a really, really, really green or really, really red start and end. That's usually telling us that it's not calculating the yield right up tight to the headland. So if it's, and you'll notice it because it'll happen every other pass. So your first start very green, the second pass will start very red, then it'll start very green again and very red. If you start seeing that pattern, just come in here and adjust your flow sensor to help correct that. Adjust GPS. This helps nudge your line over if you're using, say, different sources of GPS. So if you have RTK at planting but WAS at harvest or something like that, and they just don't line up perfectly, you can use this to help adjust where you are sitting in the field. So I can tap, let's say, the left one, and it's going to send me a foot to the west, or however far you need to adjust yourself so that you line up with those passes properly. This would be especially important if you have any kind of trial in your field. So if you have more than one hybrid, or if you did a fungicide trial or anything like that, and you want to make sure that things end up really nicely, you can use this tool to help adjust your location in the field. And the last one is crop settings. This is where you can just come in and edit nominal weight and moisture to help line up with your yield monitor or however it's being calculated at your local elevator. So just know that that's in there as well. So those are all the items that I wanted to cover off that are important for making sure that you have things set up. The next thing we're going to do is to actually jump in and connect to a drive to see what that experience looks like and to know where we can adjust things while we're connected to the drive. So I have a drive with me and I'm just going to plug it in. This is, of course, a demo, so it's not going to be the exact real life experience, but it kind of gives us a good idea. So I have connected it, and I'm going to just by going into my settings and then toggling down to devices on the right-hand side. And we can see that I have one that has already been set up. And I'm just waiting for this guy to connect. Let's see if I can signal. There we go. It's connected for me. If you have never connected to your drive before, you'll simply just tap pair new drive and it will pull up the serial number that is on your drive. And you can find your serial number just by flipping it over. And there's a little number on the rim. And that's what you'll see come up here. And you can just pair that one. It's the same as if you were going to pair your phone to your truck or something like that. So I know I'm connected when I have my little green check mark. I'm going to go to my equipment next because we want to make sure that we're connected to the correct equipment. We can see I am connected to a combine. I'm going to select setup and heads, and we can see that I am connected to my 40-foot platform head. So if that's what I'm using, I will just leave it as. If I was going to switch to my corn head, I would just select make active and it will make that change for me. So we know we're connected to the right equipment. We're then going to go to the map screen, and this is where we're going to be collecting all of our data. As you pull into one of your field boundaries, you will get a pop-up asking you to confirm that you're in that field. Because I'm obviously sitting in my office right now, I don't have that option, so I'm just going to select a field from my list. But this is the pop-up that you will see. It says change active field. Do you wish to make field back 30 active? And I will just say yes to confirm that that is the field that I'm in. On my screen, you can see that there's a number of different metrics that we can collect as we're harvesting in the field. Down the left-hand side, there's a number of different items that we can collect, but we also have the option to collect some more. And I'm going to click the edit button in the bottom left-hand corner to pull up all the different things that we can be collecting as we're traveling through the field. So you can see that we have instant moisture, there's field acres, the remaining acres in the field, lots of different things in here. If you want to change any of these out, let's say I want to do load moisture, I just hold my finger on it, drag it over to the left where I want to drop it, and replace it. How you edit that pane on the left-hand side, if it's something that you don't want to see, you can just click the little arrow and it's going to hide it for you. And then if you want to bring it back, you just click the arrow. If any of these are showing up yellow, so you can see head height at the bottom of the screen is yellow, that means FieldView doesn't feel like there's enough information to be filling in that box, would be an easy way to say it. So because we did not set up the head height, it's basically notifying us that we need to do something about that. And so that's why I wanted to wait to come in here to show you how to do that. So what you would do is just click on the head height box, and it has this, this little option. And so it's actually really handy. It just walks you through how to do it. So if I click set, it's going to say lift your head to the raised position and tap next. So if you have a preset, click that. And then once it has raised fully, click next, and it will populate the percentage of whatever that head height is. So it might be 32%, it might be 42%. Again, however high you lift it is what it will indicate it is as. And then it tells me to lower my head slightly from the raised position and then tap done. So I'll hit that. And then because I'm not actually connected, it told me that I didn't lower it enough. But if you lowered it slightly, it would say, okay, that's below the max harvesting height. So we, it'll just wrap it up for you. So once that's done, you can just exit, and then it will collect your data properly for you. The other item I wanted to touch on was your load list. So if you have a certain trial in your field that you want to mark into different loads, you can do that by clicking this load button that's the third across from the left. And so far, there's only one load that's being collected in this field. But basically what it does is it creates individual harvested acres, wet weights, moisture, and dry bushel, and then average yield calculations for each piece of the field that you want to break out. So if you have a hybrid trial or a fungicide trial or anything like that that you want to break down into individual loads, you can come in here to look at that. To create a new load, you just tap new load, and you'll see that it switched from load 1 to load 2. I'll tap it one more time and it'll go from load 2 to load 3. There. So just know that option is there. Adjust GPS is 1, 2, 3, 4th down on my left-hand side. If we click on that one, this is the same as what we were adjusting in the equipment setup, but you can actually do it within the field on the fly to go back to your equipment. So I had put it 1 foot to the west. If that's too much, you bring it back to say 10 inches to the west, or whatever we need to line up our different GPS sources. And then I'll just select done to save that change. A couple other things to know that you have as you're in the field. Across the top of my screen, it says back 30, that's the field, 2020 soybeans, and then yield. If I click on yield, I can just toggle between the different layers that I'm gathering. So I just toggled over to moisture. We can do combine speed, harvest date, and then the loads map will show me the different loads that we had created. So just know you can toggle through those. And of course, if you split or click on the split screen option, you can compare those different layers on the fly as you're going through the field. To jump out, I'll just click that icon again. And then below that is what we call the More Options button. You can click the Harvest Summary while you're traveling through the field. This is typically the one that you'll pull up after you're harvesting, where you can send it out if this was a custom field. If you want to send it to somebody, you can do that from here. And so this will just continue to populate as you run through the field. But another option is directly above the house, there's a little kind of Excel-looking spreadsheet. This one, again, also populates on the fly, and it's just another way of looking at the data that you're collecting through the field. So just know that they're there, play with them. You can't do anything to break them as you're going through. So just become familiar with them and know that if this is something that you think is helpful for you. I think that's all I wanted to cover for the in-cab experience, just to make you aware of all the options that are there. The last thing we wanted to cover for this webinar was just talking about field boundaries and why it's important to have nice, clean field boundaries going into harvest. And so I just have a couple examples of poor field boundaries here on the screen. You can see on the left, I have two field boundaries that are sitting on top of one another. And the reason that's problematic is each of those boundaries has a different name, and my planting data might be under one of the boundaries, but if I put my harvest data under the other boundary, you can't compare them side by side. They'll be considered two separate fields, and we'll have to work with support to get that all together. So if you have any boundaries that look like this, please call support and they can help you make that into a single boundary. Whereas on the right-hand side, this may look okay, but it's actually, I would, it's a poor boundary. One, because it does include, you can see there's some buildings and a laneway and some trees. We would want to cut those out, but this is also a poor boundary because it's covering 3 different fields. So we can see there's probably winter wheat right here, and this one might be planted to soybeans, and this one might be planted to corn. That's really going to throw off things in the back end. So if you have examples like this, you're also going to want to edit them. These ones are easy to edit on your own, and I recommend doing that on the website, climatefieldview.ca. You just click on the individual field and click edit. And you're able to drag and drop those boundaries. So I would bring this boundary in, cover just the wheat, and then I would create a new field boundary for each of these fields. So this one, very easy to correct on your own. This one, I would recommend just calling in and having support assist you with it. Other examples of messy field boundaries could include ones where the boundaries are just too close together. Let's say this is a really big wheat field right here. And I actually have it split down the center where I have wheat on the west and corn planted on the east. If the boundaries are very, very close together, we can run into issues with boundary detection. And basically, you will keep getting a prompt that comes up on your screen that says, do you wish to make this field active? And basically, that happens when we have a poor GPS signal and it thinks we're bouncing into the next field or the neighboring field. So if you get those boundaries really and they're slightly saturated, then you're going to have a much better experience when harvesting those fields, and you're not going to constantly be having kind of annoying pop-ups. If you are having annoying pop-ups though, let me just disconnect from my drive. I want to show you how you can adjust your boundary detection options. And to do that, you have to do this while disconnected to a drive, but on your map screen in the top right-hand corner, there's a map options button. And in the bottom right-hand of the top options, it says field boundary detection. You can see it says prompt, auto, and disabled. And so prompt is what we will typically default to. And what that means is as the platform thinks you're traveling into a new field boundary, you're going to get a pop-up that says, do you wish to make back 30 or whatever your field name is active? And you would select yes or no. If you have boundaries that are really close together and it thinks you're jumping into the neighboring field, you of course would hit no, but you might get that multiple times as you're driving along the side of the field. So prompt is really good if you have messy field boundaries, just to confirm that you are putting the data in the correct field. But the downside of it is you will get a lot of prompts on your field, on your screen, if the boundaries are poor. What auto does, and it will give you a little description here as you toggle over to it. What auto does is, if instead of getting the pop-up, it's just going, if it thinks you're crossing into the next boundary, it's just going to automatically do it. It's not going to ask you to confirm. That is problematic if you have poor boundaries, because you don't want that data from field A getting assigned to field B and back to field A and back to field B. So I would only use auto if you have very, very clean boundaries and you're confident that this will not be an issue for you. And the last option is disabled. And what disabled is it shuts off the boundary detection, which means as you enter a new field, you have to click this drop down like I did to change the field you're going to. And it will ask you, do you wish to make this field active? And you have to select yes. I would only do that if you know that you will be diligent in changing fields, because if you don't change fields by clicking the drop down, it's just going to continue up the data in the last field you were in. So just know that those map options are there. Prompt is, of course, the one that we would recommend, but if are really sick of annoying pop-ups and you don't have time to fix your boundaries, the auto and disabled are there as well. So I think that's all we needed to cover for today. Thank you so much for joining. If we have a bit of time left, Eric, did any questions come in that we could answer for the group?
No questions came in.
No questions came in. Okay. If you have any questions, do feel free to type those in. But I will just say, if you are looking for more kind of harvest time webinars, our next one is going to be around using field health images at harvest timing. I will be leading one on September 2nd, but there will also be one on the 3rd and the 9th, and those will be run by our Western colleagues. So know that those are available and you can sign up for those the same way you signed up for this webinar through the website. Following the webinar, you will get an email, as I said, with instructions on how to do all of the things that we've covered today as resources for yourselves. And if you do have any questions that come up after this, please feel free to reach out to us. We can be contacted many different ways. Of course, you can go to the website, you can call our 1-800 number, or you can get a hold of us on many different social outlets, as you can see on the screen. And of course, if you have one of our phone numbers, please just give us a call. There's lots of us on the team that are happy to answer questions.
So Lydia, I have one question.
Perfect.
It's every field, do you have to set the header height?
Oh, great question. No, you do not. Once you've set the header height for that specific head, you're good to go for the season. You do have to set it for every individual head you have. So if you have a corn head, you're going to have to set it for that one. And then if you have a platform head, you'll have to set it for it. But once it's been set, you're good to go. Great question.
Great, thanks.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, we can wrap up. But like I said, if you have any questions, please do reach out. We're happy to help. And we hope you have a safe and prosperous harvest.